Put the bank card on the table.
I already told you I did not take it.
The withdrawals used your access.
Then let Dad answer one question.
He is exhausted. Stop pressuring him.
Mallory, remove your hand from his shoulder.
You do not get to direct this room. The bank says $96,000 is gone.
And the bank can still be wrong about who moved it.
Your name is on every transfer.
A name on the screen is not a hand at the counter.
Mallory tapped one line hard enough to bend the paper, then explained the cash withdrawal at 6:18 Tuesday morning. Instead of answering her, Ethan turned the statement toward Graham and crouched beside the wheelchair. Graham's breathing was uneven, but his eyes moved steadily along the transaction column. "Dad, point to the line you want me to read." "He cannot manage this," Mallory said. "He can point." Graham raised one trembling finger. It hovered above the paper before touching the letter W printed beside the withdrawal. The investigator stepped closer. Ethan followed his father's finger and recognized the transaction code. "That means the money was taken through the drive-through window." Mallory's hand slipped from Graham's shoulder to the wheelchair handle. "So? My truck was already on a school maintenance lift. The starter had been removed before 6 that morning. You could have used another vehicle." "I could have," Ethan said, "but you filed for guardianship before asking whether I did." Mallory opened her leather bag and removed a court packet. She slid it across the table without taking her eyes from him. "I filed because Dad is no longer safe with you controlling his money." Mason stared at the packet. The soldering iron was still warming in his hand, and a thin strand of smoke rose from its tip. Mallory turned toward him. "And until the court decides, your father may not be safe to trust either." The kitchen fell silent except for the refrigerator motor and Graham's strained breathing. Ethan did not touch the bank card or the guardianship papers. He remained beside his father, close enough to help, but far enough away to leave Graham room to answer. "Dad, do you want me to stay?" Graham's mouth moved, but the first attempt produced no sound. Mallory leaned over him again. "He needs rest." Graham struck the wheelchair arm with his palm. Once, then again. Ethan waited without completing the sentence for him. "Stay," Graham finally said. The word came slowly, but it reached every person in the kitchen. The county investigator lowered her eyes and wrote it into the record. Mallory looked away. Ethan rose. At 45, he had the thick wrists and permanently marked hands of a man who spent his days repairing electrical systems beneath school buses. Grease remained beneath one thumbnail from removing a failed starter the previous evening. He had arrived at his father's house before 7 because Graham's pharmacy called about an unpaid heart medication. Instead, he found Mallory, Lydia, a stack of bank statements, and an emergency guardianship petition already prepared. Graham had suffered a mild stroke 5 months earlier. His speech slowed, and his right hand weakened, but his memory remained steady. The problem was not that he failed to understand. The problem was that impatient people answered before he finished. Mallory had done that since childhood. Ethan had done it too, though less often than he once had. Mason unplugged the soldering iron and set it on the entry table. Did Grandpa know about the guardianship papers? Mallory turned toward him. "This is an adult matter." "He is asking about his grandfather," Ethan said. Mallory picked up the bank card and placed it beside Graham's hand. "Dad asked me to protect him." Graham stared at the card. "Did he ask you to file?" Ethan asked. "He told me he was frightened." "Of me? Of losing his home? Of becoming dependent? Of waking up and finding another bill paid without his permission?" Ethan looked at Graham. "Did I pay something you did not approve?" Graham's eyes moved toward Mallory. That hesitation hurt more than an accusation. Lydia then reconstructed the financial arrangement in plain terms. Ethan had held limited account access for 4 years, beginning after his mother died. He received no compensation, but he had transferred money to his own company for 2 roof repairs, property tax reimbursement, and wheelchair ramp supplies. The ramp invoice carried Graham's signature. The larger roof payment did not. Graham had approved it verbally while watching the emergency repairs, but Ethan had never obtained a separate written authorization. That omission became the first real weakness in his defense. The repair was legitimate, yet the money had moved from Graham's account into Ethan's business without documentation strong enough to survive a hostile review. Mallory used the gap immediately. She described the payment as proof that Ethan decided what protection meant and paid himself afterward. Lydia did not accept that conclusion, but she could not dismiss the transaction either. Graham tried to redirect attention to the statements. He pointed toward the repeated Brighthaven charges and clearly denied hiring the company. Mallory claimed his memory had become inconsistent since the stroke. Ethan asked whether Mallory had used the tablet he configured for Graham. After a long pause, Graham confirmed that she had handled bills on it many times. The trusted device therefore proved access, not identity. It opened the first crack in the accusation against Ethan, while the undocumented roof payment opened another crack beneath him. Mallory had built the case so every answer weakened someone. Lydia collected the card, statements, and guardianship petition. She told Ethan not to contact the bank independently or alter any devices at Graham's house. When she left, Mallory gathered her coat. "You should prepare Mason for what happens if the court removes you from Dad's affairs." Mason stepped forward. "Why would that affect me?" Mallory looked at Ethan. "Financial exploitation can affect employment. Employment affects custody." Ethan understood. She was not only defending herself, she was widening the threat. "If you believe I stole from Dad," he said, "why did you wait 8 months?" "I did not know the amount until the bank called." "Why did the bank call you?" "Because I am his daughter." "I am his son. You are the person attached to the withdrawals." Mallory opened the door. Graham spoke behind her. "Mallory." She stopped. He struggled for the next word. "Wait." Mallory's face softened for 1 second. She turned back. Graham pointed towards the kitchen drawer, where he kept old receipts. Mallory shook her head. "And not today." She left. Ethan watched through the window as she crossed the driveway to a dark blue crossover. A crescent-shaped dent marked the rear passenger door. He had seen the dent before, but he had no reason to remember it until the W beside the withdrawal. "Drive-through, vehicle, dent." He wrote all 3 words on the back of a utility envelope. Mason read them over his shoulder. "You think she made the withdrawal?" "I think her car matters." "Do you think she stole all of it?" "I do not know." "She filed papers saying you did." "That is something I know." Mason looked at Graham. "Grandpa, do you believe Dad took your money?" Graham's mouth opened. Ethan raised one hand. "Let him answer in his time." Graham looked at Mason, then at Ethan. "No." Mason's shoulders lowered, but not completely. "Then why did you look at Aunt Mallory when Dad asked about the roof?" Graham closed his eyes. The answer did not come. Later that morning, Ethan paid for Graham's medication with a credit card, already carrying Mason's dental expenses. After settling Graham in the living room, he placed the speech therapy communication board within reach. He did not conduct the exchange like an interrogation. He asked one question at a time, waited through the silence, and recorded only what Graham clearly confirmed. Graham indicated that Mallory had requested money many times. At first, he had given it willingly because she said her shoulder pain required treatment. He had not understood how much money eventually left the account, and he had never knowingly hired Brighthaven. When Ethan asked about the signatures, Graham pointed toward the kitchen drawer. The drawer held folded pharmacy notices, utility statements, and several Brighthaven invoices. Some carried Graham's genuine signature. Mallory had not fabricated every document. She had placed false services among papers Graham signed while trying to help her. Mason watched Ethan compare the pages. The contradiction disturbed him more than a simple forgery would have. Graham could truthfully deny hiring the company while still having signed its forms. Mallory had built the fraud from real acts of trust, which meant Ethan could not divide the evidence neatly into honest and fake. The discovery weakened Ethan's position. It also revealed the method. Mallory had not needed to imitate Graham perfectly. She only needed him tired, worried about her pain, and willing to sign before he understood the purpose. At noon, the school transportation director called. A complaint had been filed accusing Ethan of elder exploitation. Because his position involved student transportation, purchasing access, and district equipment, he was placed on paid administrative leave, pending review. Ethan listened without interrupting. When the call ended, Mason immediately blamed Mallory. Ethan refused to repeat the accusation as fact, even after Mason reminded him that she had predicted the job suspension. The restraint frustrated Mason. He argued that anger sometimes recognized danger before evidence caught up. Ethan admitted that was possible, but he would not let suspicion become the only standard governing the family. Mason then asked whether Mallory's habit involved drugs. Ethan acknowledged that she had once been prescribed pain medication, although he had not known she was still using it or that she had lost her job. That answer disappointed Mason. His father spent every workday identifying hidden failures, yet he had missed what was happening inside his own family. Ethan explained that people did not behave like wiring harnesses, but the sentence sounded defensive even to him. Mason heard it as an excuse and went upstairs before Ethan found a better way to say what he meant. Mason went upstairs. Ethan remained beside Graham. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to feel what the accusations were doing beyond the bank balance. His father's money was gone. His sister might be dependent on drugs. His job was suspended. His son had begun measuring his honesty, and every official record still carried Ethan's name. That afternoon, a temporary court order suspended Ethan's authority over Graham's accounts. Mallory's emergency guardianship petition remained pending, but the judge appointed a neutral financial monitor until a capacity evaluation could be completed. The court also ordered Ethan not to remove Graham from the house without approval. Mallory arrived for the hearing wearing a pale gray suit. She spoke softly and referred to Graham as our vulnerable father. Ethan watched her hands. She folded every document into 3 equal sections before placing it in her bag. He had seen the same fold inside the kitchen drawer. Afterward, Mallory approached Mason in the courthouse hallway and framed the dispute as something Ethan had dragged him into. When Mason asked directly whether she had taken the money, she refused to discuss finances with a minor and redirected attention to Graham's genuine signatures. She then played the edited recording in which Ethan appeared to say that Graham could no longer control his own account. Mason recognized his father's voice and asked whether the statement was real. Ethan explained that the clip removed the surrounding discussion about a fraudulent delivery link and temporary limits on online access. Mallory did not need to disprove that explanation. She only needed Mason to hear the harshest sentence before the full context could be recovered. Mason walked away from both of them. The scene accomplished what Mallory intended. Ethan's technical explanations sounded like corrections offered after the damage, while Mallory's accusation arrived first and carried the emotional force of certainty. Ethan had been correct about the transaction code, the tablet access, and the vehicle. None of it mattered to Mason in that moment. A child did not experience evidence as a sequence. He experienced the person who looked more honest while standing in front of him. The next morning, Ethan did not begin with the bank. He went to the school bus garage. His supervisor had revoked his system access, but district policy allowed him to retrieve personal tools under observation. Ernest Vale, the assistant mechanic, walked with him between the yellow buses. Ethan's truck remained on the maintenance lift, where he had left it Monday evening. The starter sat on a labeled tray. A work order camera had photographed the repair bay every 15 minutes for inventory security. At 5:50 p.m. Monday, Mason had taken a picture of the removed starter. At 6:18 Tuesday morning, the fixed garage camera showed the truck still raised, its front wheel removed. The evidence did not prove Mallory made the withdrawal. It proved Ethan did not use his truck. Ernest printed the maintenance log and signed a chain of custody note. "You think this gets you back to work?" he asked. "No." "What does it get you?" "One false certainty removed." Ernest looked at the suspended employee badge clipped to Ethan's belt. "You always answer like a service manual." Service manuals are written after something expensive fails. Ethan took the records to Lydia Frost. She had obtained the bank's transaction detail. The 618 withdrawal occurred at the East Drive-Thru branch. The teller lane camera retained only 30 days of video, but the bank still had vehicle notes entered by the teller. Blue crossover, rear door dent, driver claimed father in back seat. Ethan read the note twice. "Who wrote this?" "Evelyn Pruitt, part-time teller." "Did she identify Mallory?" "Not yet. The bank manager says she may be confusing visits." "Where is Evelyn?" "Off today." "Then interview her before someone teaches her what not to remember." Lydia looked at him. "You do not direct my investigation." "No." "You keep speaking as though every delay is intentional." "Not every delay. Only the ones that protect an institution from admitting it verified the wrong person." Lydia held his gaze, then closed the file. "I will interview her this afternoon." That evidence changed the bank's position. It no longer described the withdrawal as conclusively made by Ethan. It changed the transaction to disputed pending video and teller review. The bank still refused to unfreeze Graham's account. The evidence weakened the accusation without restoring Graham's access to his money. Ethan returned to Graham's house and found a home care evaluator speaking with Mallory in the living room. Mallory had arranged an assessment without telling him. Silas Crowell stood near the front window, wearing a dark coat and a laminated Brighthaven badge. At 51, he had the polished stillness of a man accustomed to entering private homes under an official title. The folder in his hand contained service acknowledgments bearing Graham's genuine signature. Their dates overlapped with real physical therapy appointments, allowing Brighthaven to claim it had provided transportation without proving which vehicle or driver had done so. Ethan asked for the company's state license number and the name of one driver. Silas answered with procedural language about contracted providers and client privacy. He never supplied a verifiable fact. Graham denied that Silas had ever driven him. Silas responded by implying that post-stroke recall was unreliable, even though no clinician had reached that conclusion. The exchange revealed Silas's role more clearly than an admission would have. He used professional vocabulary to reduce Graham's denial into a symptom, and Ethan's questions into interference by a suspect. Before leaving, Silas warned that families became destructive when one person insisted every form of help pass through him. The sentence was aimed at Ethan, but Silas watched Mallory while saying it. Outside, Ethan saw Silas grip her elbow and speak close to her face. Mallory pulled away, then nodded. They were not equal partners. Silas behaved like a creditor, confirming that a debtor still understood the terms. The danger had widened. Mallory had chosen to accuse Ethan, but another person was setting the price of stopping. That afternoon, Evelyn Pruitt met Lydia at the bank. Ethan was excluded from the interview, but Evelyn later testified at a formal case conference. She was 64, silver-haired, and deliberate. Her manager called her cautious. Evelyn corrected him and said accuracy was the reason she still had the original transaction notes. Her carbon copies showed that each disputed withdrawal slip had been folded into 3 equal sections. More importantly, her notebook described the vehicle and driver within minutes of the 6/18 transaction. The entry identified Mallory Blaine, a blue crossover, a crescent-shaped dent on the rear passenger door, and a driver who claimed Graham was sitting in the back seat. Evelyn had looked for him and saw no passenger. Because the note was created before the family accusation, Mallory's attorney could not dismiss it as a memory reconstructed from later publicity. Evelyn had not solved the case through intuition. She had preserved an ordinary observation other employees considered unnecessary. The bank withdrew its claim that Ethan made the cash withdrawal. That should have cleared him. It did not. The electronic Brighthaven transfers still came through Ethan's administrator profile, and the roof payment remained poorly documented. Mallory's attorney argued that Ethan could have directed Mallory to collect cash. The evidence changed the question from did Ethan withdraw it to did Ethan control the person who did. Vaughn would have admired the method. A false story did not need to remain unchanged. It only needed another shape ready. Ethan returned home expecting the bank's changed position to reassure Mason. Instead, he found his son at the kitchen table with the full recording recovered from Graham's tablet backup. The complete file showed that Ethan had been discussing online safety after Graham clicked a fraudulent delivery link. He had proposed temporarily limiting digital access while preserving Graham's control over his own money. The recording cleared the meaning, but it did not restore trust immediately. Mason wanted to know why Ethan had not produced the full file sooner. Ethan admitted he had not known where it was stored and had deliberately kept Mason away from the investigation. That distinction mattered to Ethan, but not to his son. Mason understood that being protected from the case also meant being asked to trust explanations he could not verify. He then confronted the harder contradiction. Mallory had once cared for him during the worst period after his mother left. She cooked, drove him to school, and never made him feel like additional work. If she had deliberately edited the recording, those earlier acts did not become false, but they became more painful to remember. Ethan did not offer a clean, moral answer. He explained that real kindness could exist before real harm, and one did not cancel the other. Mason said that made the betrayal worse. Ethan agreed. The suspension also changed the practical rhythm of Ethan's household. His school salary continued temporarily, but overtime stopped, and the district froze his purchasing authority. He could no longer approve replacement parts or sign maintenance releases. Coworkers who once called him before every difficult electrical failure now avoided putting questions in writing. At home, Graham's frozen account forced Ethan to separate caregiving from reimbursement. He paid for medication, groceries, and transportation himself, then stored every receipt in dated envelopes. He refused to transfer money later unless the court monitor approved it. The caution protected him, but it also made ordinary care slower. A prescription refill required 3 calls. A wheelchair tire replacement waited 2 days because the vendor would not accept Ethan's personal card without a new authorization. Graham noticed each delay. Ethan understood that innocence did not prevent harm. A false accusation could become operational truth long before a court corrected it. The bank freeze, employment suspension, and guardianship review were not abstract risks. They changed who could buy medicine, authorize repairs, and decide where Graham slept. Mason saw those consequences too. He stopped asking whether the family would be fine and began asking which bill came next. Ethan answered with exact numbers when he had them and admitted uncertainty when he did not. That change mattered. Before the accusation, Ethan believed confidence made a child feel safe. During the investigation, Mason needed accuracy more than reassurance. The court appointed Dr. Celeste Rowan to evaluate Graham's decision-making capacity. Celeste arrived without speaking to Ethan or Mallory first. She asked both siblings to leave the room, then spent nearly 2 hours with Graham, using written choices, picture boards, yes or no verification, and repeated questions at different points. Mallory objected to the length. Celeste said, "Speed measures speech. I am measuring understanding." Her report concluded that Graham understood his property, family relationships, income, and the consequences of guardianship. He needed communication support and protection from undue influence, not total removal of his rights. That evidence changed the guardianship case completely. Mallory could no longer gain control by describing Graham as incapable. Silas changed his approach. Brighthaven submitted a long-term care contract allegedly signed by Graham. The contract claimed unpaid fees secured by a future interest in his house. If Graham remained legally competent, then the signature could be treated as a binding choice. They had prepared both stories. If he lacked capacity, Mallory should control him. If he had capacity, he had supposedly signed away the house. Celeste asked Graham about the contract. He recognized his signature, but not the pages. "Where were you when you signed?" she asked. Graham pointed to bed. "Hospital? No." "Your bedroom?" "Yes." "Who was present?" "Mallory." "Did you read the pages?" "No." "Why did you sign?" Graham pointed to Payne, then Mallory. Mallory told him the papers would help pay for her treatment. The signature was real. The purpose had been misrepresented. Ethan felt anger rise, but Celeste stopped him before he spoke. "Do not answer for him." The correction landed. Ethan stepped back. He had spent days criticizing Mallory for speaking over Graham. Fear could push him into the same behavior. Graham looked at him and tapped wait. Ethan waited. Graham pointed to help, then Mallory, then no house. He had wanted to help his daughter. He had never agreed to risk his home. The distinction became central. Kendra's equivalent in this case was Assistant Prosecutor Helena Voss, a financial abuse specialist. Helena traced Brighthaven's account through subpoenas. The company received funds from 7 older adults. In each case, a relative with debt, addiction, or a hidden legal problem initiated the payments. Silas did not hack accounts himself. He found family members who already had access and converted shame into labor. He supplied invoice templates, false service descriptions, and cash. Then, he preserved messages showing the relative's drug purchases or debts. The family member became thief, witness, and hostage at the same time. Mallory was not the only one. The scale explained Silas's confidence without reducing Mallory's responsibility. He had watched other families blame the most responsible child while the compromised child performed concern. If you have ever watched shame turn a family against the person still trying to protect it, stay with Ethan, because the next choice would decide whether Graham kept his home and his voice. Helena's investigation widened through ordinary records rather than a single dramatic discovery. Pharmacy purchase patterns showed that Mallory's use had accelerated after losing her job. Cash withdrawals rose within days of Silas increasing the amount she owed. Brighthaven invoices then appeared whenever the account balance recovered. Other families described the same progression. A relative first borrowed with permission, then concealed the amount, then accepted Silas's help creating a service explanation. Once the first lie existed, Silas preserved enough evidence to make disclosure feel more dangerous than continued theft. The network worked because each participant carried a different fear. Older account holders feared losing independence. Their children feared exposing addiction, debt, or professional misconduct. Banks feared admitting weak verification. Care agencies feared liability. Silas did not need absolute control over anyone. He needed every person to delay telling the complete truth. Ethan's case disrupted that structure because Graham remained capable of speaking. Evelyn documented the driver, and the district garage independently fixed Ethan's location. None of those facts alone explained the money. Together, they prevented Silas from forcing the family into a single convenient story. Helena used the pattern to obtain broader warrants. The evidence showed Brighthaven had billed for transportation on days when no registered vehicle entered several treatment facilities. Some invoices described medication delivery during hours when the listed pharmacies were closed. Others repeated identical mileage across different towns. Each contradiction removed another layer of official appearance. The company had looked legitimate because forms, dates, and service language matched familiar systems. Once compared against independent clocks and locations, the structure failed. At the midpoint case conference, Helena laid out the known facts. Mallory made at least 11 drive-through withdrawals. The trusted tablet initiated the electronic payments. Brighthaven returned cash to Mallory through Silas. Graham signed several documents under false explanations. Ethan authorized the roof payment without written approval. Mallory filed the guardianship petition and used the edited recording. Silas held the network together. Helena said, "We can prosecute Silas without Mallory's cooperation, but the coercion records and victim list are likely on a physical ledger or offline device." "Why offline?" Ethan asked. "Silas avoids putting final debts in the same system as the invoices. Mallory might know where it was." She refused to speak. 2 days later, Silas sent a package to Mason at school. It contained a Brighthaven invoice and a note, directing him to ask why Ethan's profile had authorized the payment. The school preserved the package and contacted Lydia before allowing Ethan near it. By the time he arrived, Mason had already read the note. The electronic payments still carried Ethan's administrator identity, so the accusation remained technically possible even after Evelyn cleared the drive-through withdrawal. Mason asked whether Ethan could prove Mallory used the tablet. Ethan could not yet do so. Their argument exposed a deeper problem than evidence. Ethan kept describing unresolved facts with precise language, while Mason heard only that certainty had failed again. At last, Ethan stopped speaking like a technician. He admitted that he was afraid of losing his job, Graham's house, and Mason's trust before the answer arrived. Mason admitted his own fear, that Mallory would die before the family understood how to help her. The shared fear did not resolve the account records. It reminded them that neither wanted victory at the cost of Mallory's life. Mallory appeared at Graham's house after midnight 3 nights later. She was sweating despite the cold and held one arm tightly against her body. Ethan admitted her only after Helena confirmed that officers were positioned nearby. Mallory looked toward Graham's closed bedroom door before sitting at the same table where she had first accused Ethan. Her confession arrived unevenly. The first request had been for $620, supposedly for physical therapy. Part of it paid for treatment. The rest went to pills. Silas then extended credit, increased the price, and turned each unpaid amount into leverage. Mallory admitted watching Ethan enter the administrator code on Graham's tablet. Silas supplied the Brighthaven invoices and showed her how to disguise the payments among legitimate household expenses. She also admitted cutting Ethan's recording because Mason trusted his father more than he trusted her. "You used a child to protect a drug supplier," Ethan said. Mallory did not deny it. She said she had used the only pressure Ethan could not calmly explain away. The resentment beneath the fraud finally surfaced. Mallory had spent years watching Graham call Ethan whenever a panel, furnace, tax form, or medical bill failed. After her accident, she felt like the broken thing everyone expected Ethan to repair. Accepting treatment from him would have meant becoming, in her mind, another problem her brother solved. Ethan listened without accepting ownership of her choices. He acknowledged that he had not asked enough questions after the accident, but he refused to let that failure become responsibility for the theft. Mallory then described Silas's real records. He carried an offline dispatch tablet containing names, debts, medication histories, family access, and pressure points. He expected her to obtain guardianship, use Graham's house to cover the debt, and continue feeding the network. She had come because Silas had escalated beyond Graham. He knew Mason's school route and had promised that one photograph would make Ethan cooperate. Helena entered from the back hallway after hearing the threat through the controlled safety plan. Mallory asked Ethan whether he would protect her. "I will help keep you alive," he said. She understood what he did not add. Help was not forgiveness, and cooperation would not erase her crimes. For the first time, Mallory accepted those terms without asking him to soften them. The plan centered on the guardianship evaluation scheduled for the following week. Silas believed Mallory would be granted control or at least temporary authority to contract for Graham's care. He intended to present a new Brighthaven agreement and collect the house equity through a lien. Mallory would tell him Ethan had agreed to step aside to protect Mason from publicity. Ethan would appear resigned. Graham would attend with Celeste and independent counsel. Mason would remain in a secured room because Silas had already threatened him. Helena's team would wait until Silas produced the dispatch tablet or explicitly linked the contract to past debts. The plan carried risk. Mallory could relapse, warn Silas, or change sides. Silas could detect surveillance. Graham could become exhausted. Ethan could lose control when the man who threatened Mason entered the room. Celeste looked at Ethan during rehearsal. "Your father's pace controls the questioning." "I understand." "No. You understand the sentence. Can you allow silence when the answer may decide whether your son is safe?" Ethan looked at Graham. "I will." Graham tapped wait. Ethan waited. Then Graham pointed to trust, followed by help. Trust was not surrender. Help was not control. The difference had become the spine of the case. The guardianship evaluation took place in a county services building with wide hallways, security glass, and rooms designed for people who needed help moving or speaking. Ethan arrived at 12:54 p.m. He wore his clean district work shirt, even though the school had not restored him to duty. The suspended identification badge remained at home. Mason waited in a secured interview room with a school counselor and an officer. He had argued against staying out of sight. "If Silas uses me as pressure, I should hear what he says." "No," Ethan told him. "Being involved is not the same as being exposed. You let Grandpa attend. Grandpa is the person whose rights are being decided, and I am the person Silas threatened. That is why you are protected." Mason looked toward the closed evaluation room. "You cannot keep deciding that protection means I get less truth." Ethan did not have a complete answer. "I will tell you everything after the officers clear it." "That is another promise about something you do not control." Ethan accepted the correction. "I will tell you everything I am allowed to tell you, and I will not pretend I know the outcome." Mason nodded. "Better." Graham arrived with Celeste and his independent attorney. He wore a brown cardigan, dark trousers, and the old analog wristwatch he had used during 40 years as an industrial electrician. Mallory came 10 minutes later. Her hands shook. She had agreed to medication-assisted treatment after the midnight meeting, but withdrawal still moved visibly through her body. Silas entered at 1:26. He wore a dark blue jacket with the Brighthaven badge clipped near his chest and carried a compact black dispatch tablet. The device matched Mallory's description. He greeted the evaluator, the court-appointed monitor, and Graham's attorney with professional restraint. He did not greet Ethan. The evaluator explained that the meeting would determine Graham's capacity, care needs, financial safeguards, and whether emergency guardianship remained necessary. Graham answered through a combination of speech and written choices. He understood the purpose of the hearing, identified his money and house, and said both remained his decision. When asked whether Mallory should become his guardian, he refused. He also refused to appoint Ethan. The second answer struck Ethan, but he did not interrupt. Graham needed support, not another owner. With Celeste's assistance, he selected supported decision-making and an independent monitor for large transactions. That choice altered the entire dispute. Mallory could no longer present herself as the necessary replacement for Ethan, and Ethan could no longer define victory as gaining sole control. Graham had rejected the family's assumption that care required one child to possess authority over him. Silas placed a long-term Brighthaven contract on the table and argued that its unpaid balance remained enforceable regardless of guardianship. Graham's attorney requested the original service logs. Silas unlocked the dispatch tablet and displayed appointments matching Graham's real therapy visits, medication pickups, and weekend needs. The dates were genuine. The assigned providers were not. Mallory followed the plan by demanding the payment history and claiming she needed proof that Brighthaven had advanced funds. Silas resisted because accounting fell outside the narrow capacity review. Her insistence forced him to open the offline ledger. The screen listed names beside codes for debt, medication, family access, property value, and emotional leverage. Graham's entry identified as house equity, Mallory's dependency, Ethan's administrator profile, and Mason as juvenile pressure. The ledger changed the hearing from a family dispute into direct evidence of an organized exploitation system. Helena rose. "Do not touch the device." Silas looked toward the doors. 2 investigators entered. The evaluator moved Graham's wheelchair away from the table. Silas did not run immediately. He looked at Mallory. "You brought them into this room while you were carrying enough pills in your history to lose everything." Mallory's face drained. "You said you would never use Mason." "I said I would not need to if you followed instructions." The admission entered the room clearly. Helena said, "Silas Crowell, step away from the tablet." Silas reached for it. Mallory grabbed his wrist. "Leave it." He struck her across the face with the back of his hand. Ethan moved. Silas shoved the table toward Graham. The heavy edge struck the wheelchair footrest and turned the chair sideways. Graham began sliding. Ethan caught him beneath the arms before he reached the floor. Silas seized the dispatch tablet and ran into the hallway. Mallory followed 2 steps, then stopped. For years, fear had trained her to follow him. This time, she turned back toward Graham. That choice mattered. It did not erase what came before. Mason heard the impact from the secured room. The officer ordered him to remain inside. He saw Silas pass through the narrow window in the door and understood the man was heading toward the stairwell. Mason did not chase him. He pulled the emergency call handle and told security which direction Silas had gone. Then, he returned to the counselor and stayed with her. He chose protection over pursuit. In the evaluation room, Ethan lowered Graham into the chair. Silas's shove had trapped Ethan's right leg between the table and the wheelchair frame. Pain tore through his knee when he tried to stand. Mallory pressed a cloth against her bleeding lip. "Go," she said. "He has the ledger." Ethan looked at Graham. Graham pointed toward the door. "Go." Ethan limped into the hall. Silas had reached the ground floor lobby but found the main exit locked by the emergency response. He turned toward a service corridor leading to the loading area. Helena and an investigator followed from behind. Ethan knew the building layout from school bus accessibility inspections. The service corridor ended at a hydraulic delivery door that opened slowly and required a wall switch. Silas would be trapped for several seconds. Ethan cut through an equipment alcove and reached the loading bay first. Silas entered the loading bay with a tablet concealed inside his jacket. Ethan planted his injured leg between Silas and the hydraulic door. The exit required a wall switch and 12 slow seconds to open. Silas could not operate it, guard both corridors, and protect the tablet at once. Ethan named the structure of the scheme in a few controlled sentences. Silas had selected relatives carrying shame, increased their dependence, and counted on them protecting the secret longer than the vulnerable person. Silas answered that Mallory had approached him first. The reply avoided every action that followed. When the hydraulic motor began lifting the door, Helena's footsteps sounded in the corridor. Silas pulled a folding knife and lunged. Ethan caught the knife wrist with both hands. His damaged knee collapsed beneath him, and they struck the concrete. The weapon slid beneath a pallet rack. Silas reached for the tablet. Ethan trapped it with one foot. A kick to the injured knee sent white pain through his vision, but the delay kept Silas from reaching the rising door. Mallory appeared at the corridor entrance holding the tablet's small encryption key. Silas ordered her to bring it. She looked from him to Ethan, then dropped the key into a floor drain. Helena drove Silas against the wall before he could reach her, and 2 officers restrained him. Mallory believed she might have destroyed access to the evidence. In fact, the ledger had already been mirrored to the court recording system when Silas opened it upstairs. Her action did not save the case. It revealed which side she chose when she believed choosing it might cost everything. Paramedics stabilized Ethan's knee and examined Graham. Graham had bruising at the hip, but no fracture. Mallory required stitches inside her lip. Silas was arrested for financial exploitation, unlawful distribution, coercion, fraud, assault, and threats against a minor. The dispatch ledger connected him to 7 families and more than $400,000 in false care charges. Ethan was taken to the hospital. Mason rode with Graham in a second ambulance. Before the doors closed, Mason looked at Mallory sitting beneath police supervision. "Are you coming?" Mallory shook her head. "I have to go somewhere else." Jail processing came before treatment placement. Mason's face tightened. Mallory said, "Do not make your father explain me." It was the first time she refused to use Ethan as the translator of her choices. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Ethan with a torn knee ligament and a fractured kneecap. Surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Graham sat beside this bed while Mason stood near the window. The silence lasted until Mason admitted that he had expected Ethan to fix the crisis faster. He had blamed his father when the court moved slowly and when Mallory's version seemed easier to understand. Ethan did not defend the pace of the investigation. Mason then named the deeper problem. Ethan had hidden how frightened he was, believing calmness would protect his son. Instead, the silence made Mason feel alone and convinced him that something worse remained hidden. Ethan apologized without attaching an explanation. Graham reached into his cardigan and removed the old voltage tester he had used during 4 decades as an industrial electrician. He placed it in Ethan's hand and worked through a broken sentence indicating that Ethan was still the person he trusted to perform the final check. Ethan held the tool briefly, then returned it. "Only when you ask." Graham smiled. The exchange preserved trust without transferring ownership. The legal process separated the conduct carefully. Mallory pleaded guilty to financial exploitation, forgery, filing false guardianship information, and tampering with evidence through the edited recording. Her cooperation reduced, but did not remove the sentence. The court ordered a period of incarceration, followed by residential treatment, restitution, and supervised contact with Graham and Mason. Her dependency explained the first request for money. It did not excuse the 11 withdrawals, the fake invoices, the edited recording, or the attempt to take control of Graham's house. Silas rejected a plea agreement. His trial lasted nearly 4 weeks. Evelyn testified first about the drive-through notes. The defense tried to characterize her identification as a memory reconstructed after the family dispute. Her time-stamped notebook defeated that argument. She had documented Mallory, the blue crossover, the crescent dent, the folded slip, and the invisible backseat passenger 4 minutes after the withdrawal. Celeste then explained that slow speech did not equal impaired ownership of an answer. Her repeated capacity testing showed that Graham understood his assets, relationships, and the consequences of guardianship. Graham testified with communication support and without anyone completing his sentences. He confirmed giving Mallory money for pain treatment and signing papers she misrepresented. He denied hiring Brighthaven, pledging the house, requesting a guardian, or authorizing the disputed withdrawals. When asked whether Ethan had taken the money, Graham answered no. The digital evidence separated the roles. The tablet had been used from Graham's home, while Ethan's employee badge placed him at the bus garage. Ethan's name remained on the administrator profile because he configured the device. Mallory's fingerprint opened it during several transfers. Silas generated the invoices and received the money. The records established a complete division of labor. Ethan's identity supplied the cover, Mallory's access moved the funds, and Silas converted family shame into a repeatable system. Silas was convicted on every major count. The school district completed its review after the trial. Ethan's supervisor called him into the transportation office. The maintenance crew stood in the service bay. The supervisor read a written correction stating that Ethan had not exploited Graham and that the district's initial suspension notice had relied on incomplete allegations. Ethan listened from the folding chair, his knee still supported by a brace. When the statement ended, the supervisor offered a private apology. Ethan said, "The correction belongs in the same places as the accusation." The district sent it to every department that received the original notice. Only then did Ethan return to work. He could not crawl beneath buses yet, so he trained 2 junior technicians to compare access logs across camera, ignition, and maintenance systems. One of them asked why 3 clocks were necessary. "Because 1 record can be wrong," Ethan said. 2 can agree by accident. 3 makes someone explain the difference. The lesson was technical. The meaning was not. Graham rejected full guardianship. The court approved supported decision-making. He kept his bank card, his account, and authority over his home. Ethan could assist with bills when Graham requested it. An independent monitor reviewed transactions above a set threshold. No child held complete control. At the first meeting with the monitor, Graham placed the replacement bank card on the table. Ethan slid it back. "You keep the card. I will help when you ask." Graham closed his hand over it. That was the real reversal of the opening, not Ethan taking control. Graham keeping it. Ethan's physical recovery forced another change he had resisted for years. The knee surgery left him unable to kneel beneath buses, climb service platforms, or carry battery packs. Even after the district restored his position, he spent weeks at a desk reviewing fault histories while younger technicians performed the repairs. At first, he corrected every step from across the bay. He requested extra photographs, repeated voltage tests, and questioned tool placement. Ernest finally reminded him that supervision was not the same as replacing another person's hands. Ethan recognized the family pattern inside his work. He had criticized Mallory for taking control from Graham, yet fear had taught him to hold every responsibility too tightly. The difference in motive did not erase the similarity in effect. He began assigning complete diagnostic tasks instead of fragments. When a junior technician made a minor error, Ethan documented it, explained the consequence, and allowed him to correct it. The garage became less dependent on one person. That change later shaped the supported decision plan for Graham. The family divided responsibilities without dividing ownership. Ethan handled scheduled bills only when requested. The independent monitor reviewed large transactions. Mason helped with groceries and radio repairs, but had no access to accounts. Graham retained the card, passwords, and final authority. The arrangement was less convenient than giving one child complete control. It was also safer because no single failure could become the entire system. Recovery moved on 4 different timelines. The money came first. Investigators recovered part of Graham's savings from Brighthaven's seized accounts. Insurance and victim compensation funds replaced another portion. Mallory remained responsible for restitution after release. Not every dollar returned. Graham absorbed that fact without allowing anyone to call the remaining loss permission to control him. The house came next. Silas's care lien was declared fraudulent. The county removed it from the record, and the court barred Brighthaven or any related entity from making another claim. Graham chose to remain in the house with scheduled home support from a licensed provider. He interviewed himself. Ethan attended the meetings but did not answer questions directed to his father. The first time Graham took too long, the provider looked toward Ethan. Ethan said he is still answering. Then he waited. The relationship between Mason and Mallory healed least predictably. During her first months in treatment, Mallory sent letters. Mason ignored the early ones because they described her as the person medication had created, language that still placed the drugs at the center of every decision. Ethan did not pressure him to read or respond. Mallory's remorse belonged to her recovery. Mason's response belonged to him. Months later, a different letter arrived. Mallory listed her choices without asking for sympathy. She admitted using Graham's tablet, signing false slips, cutting Ethan's recording, misleading Mason, and seeking guardianship to protect herself. Mason finished that letter. He still chose not to visit. The progress was not reconciliation. It was the first communication from Mallory that did not assign Mason the job of making her feel forgiven. Ethan changed in quieter ways. Before the case, he treated every family crisis like an electrical fault. Identify the failed connection, isolate it, restore service. He no longer believed people could be repaired by the person most willing to carry the tools. He asked Graham before helping. He told Mason when fear, not certainty, shaped a decision. He stopped translating Mallory's actions into explanations she had not earned. At work, he created a training exercise using 3 identical fault reports. Each named the same control module as the source of a bus failure. The first report came from the dashboard. The second came from the maintenance terminal. The third came from a technician who watched the wire burn behind the panel. The name repeated across systems, Ethan told the trainees. That still does not mean the named part caused the failure. One technician asked, "Then what does?" "The action you can independently place at the scene." A year after the first accusation, the county held a public session on elder financial abuse. Evelyn explained the value of documenting unusual explanations at the moment of a transaction. Celeste described supported decision-making and the difference between communication, difficulty, and incapacity. Helena outlined how fraudulent care companies recruited relatives already carrying addiction, debt, or shame. Ethan spoke last. He placed Graham's old bank card beside a printed access log and explained that the card belonged to Graham. The profile carried Ethan's name, Mallory used the device, and Silas received the money. Every statement was technically true, yet the accusation against Ethan had still been false. He warned that care became dangerous when assistance was treated as permission to speak over someone. Evidence became dangerous when systems confused access with action. Families became dangerous when shame mattered more than the person being harmed. Afterward, an older man asked Graham how to recognize when a daughter's help had become control. Graham took his time and answered that it happened when she stopped asking. No one improved or expanded his sentence. That evening, Ethan, Mason, and Graham returned home. Mason carried a repaired tabletop radio he had been rebuilding for months. He connected the final wire and turned the dial. Static filled the kitchen. Then a clear baseball broadcast emerged. Graham smiled. Mason looked at Ethan. 3 clocks? Ethan shook his head. 1 signal, 3 people listening. Mason adjusted the volume. The bank card remained in Graham's wallet. The voltage tester remained in his drawer. Ethan remained close enough to help and far enough away to wait. A name on a screen can accuse the wrong person. A loving title can hide a selfish act. An addiction can explain a beginning without excusing what follows. What restored this family was not blind trust. It was the decision to stop speaking over the weakest voice in the room. If someone you know is caring for an aging parent, share this story with them. The safest help is the kind that preserves the person's choices while making every hand on the account answerable.